No one imagined that the storm on the mountain was hiding something far greater than an accident. That a powerful millionaire, an ambitious daughter-in-law, and a boy the world insisted on not seeing that night, while everyone slept safely in their homes, a betrayal was carried out with absolute coldness, and what should have been just another silent death among the elite almost ended like so many others, without questions, without justice, without truth. But fate miscalculated. Because between luxury and mud, between power and silence, there was a hungry child, watching everything. A black boy, mute, invisible to society, who ended up becoming the only reason this story did not end in a closed coffin. What happened next defies any logic of wealth, status, or authority. It shows that true power is not always in the hands of those who command, but in those who choose to do what is right. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is a story about delayed justice, about guilt, about dignity, and about how the truth sometimes has to pass through hell to be heard. Stay until the end, because the conclusion of this story happened in the most unlikely place, and changed the fate of everyone involved. Subscribe to the channel to follow more intense, real and emotional stories like this. The storm descended the mountain like a loose animal, and the wind hurled the rain against Lucia's face without asking permission. She pushed the wheelchair over the slippery rocks, her fingers stiff on the cold metal, her gaze far too hard for someone accompanying a helpless elderly woman. Donna Elizabeth trembled, not only from the cold, but from the strange sensation of being taken away from home, away from safety, away from everything. The sound of thunder drowned out any cry for help, and the mountain seemed to swallow Lucia's hurried steps. There was no mercy in that rushed push, only haste that did not come from the storm, but from something that had been building in her chest for years. The chair creaked at every uneven stretch, as if protesting against the fate it was being taken toward. Elizabeth tried to speak, but her voice came out weak, broken by fear. Lucia did not look back, she only moved forward, like someone carrying out a mission. The cliff appeared ahead like an open mouth, deep and silent. The rain turned the ground into mud, and every step demanded strength and balance. Lucia breathed fast, her heart racing not from fear, but from anticipation. She knew that path, knew exactly where to stop. Elizabeth felt the air change, as if the world were becoming emptier around her. The smell of wet earth mixed with the iron of the chair and the old fear rising along her spine. The elderly woman tried to grab her daughter-in-law's arm, searching for a gesture of care. But she found only tense muscles and a sudden withdrawal. Lucia's hand pulled away as if it had touched something filthy. The silence between them was more violent than the thunder. For years, Elizabeth had trusted that woman. She had allowed her presence in the family, in the house, in the life built with effort and sacrifice. Now, there on the mountain, everything seemed far too wrong to be coincidence. Lucia pushed the chair a few more meters, ignoring her mother-in-law's confused pleas. The rain hid tears that Elizabeth did not even know whether they were from fear or disappointment. The wind lifted the millionaire's gray hair like a belated warning. Each second felt longer, heavier. The mountain watched in silence, indifferent to human betrayal. There were no apparent witnesses. That was exactly what Lucia wanted. The hatred that guided Lucia was not born that night. It had been fed during silent dinners, in looks of contempt, in bills that never added up. Each step toward the cliff was a reckoning with the past. She clenched her teeth as one represses an old scream. The inheritance was the thought that burned hotter than the icy rain. Everything finally seemed within reach. The storm helped, covering tracks, erasing sounds. Nature conspired in favor of the perfect crime. Lucia felt it deep in her chest, and that certainty made her move forward without hesitation. Elizabeth tried to remember when everything had started to go wrong, whether it was at the first cold glance or the first favor denied. The chair rocked dangerously close to the edge, tearing a gasp of panic from her. The cliff was now there, impossible to ignore. The elderly woman felt her body weaken, but her mind still struggled to understand. Why? She tried to ask, but the word was lost in the wind. Lucia stopped behind the chair, taking a deep breath. The moment had arrived. There was no turning back. That was where everything would end, or begin. The rain fell harder, as if the sky itself were nervous. Lucia adjusted the position of the chair, calculating every detail. Her face showed no doubt, only resolve. Elizabeth sensed something different in her daughter-in-law's silence. A heavy, final silence. The kind of silence that precedes irreversible acts. The mountain seemed to hold its breath along with them. The wind ceased for a moment, brief beyond measure. It was in that interval that Elizabeth felt true fear, and understood that this was not a simple walk. Lucia leaned slightly forward, bringing her face close to her mother-in-law's ear. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper, mixed with the rain. It was not a voice of care. It was a voice heavy with resentment. Elizabeth felt a shiver run through her entire body. The chair creaked again, now dangerously tilted. Mud slid over the tires, making everything unstable. The cliff seemed to beckon. Lucia closed her eyes for a second, and then opened them with even greater firmness. The world seemed reduced to that point on the mountain. Everything Elizabeth had built was there, hanging by an invisible thread. Lucia positioned her feet, seeking steadiness on the treacherous ground. She did not think about consequences, only about what came after, about the money, about freedom, about the end of waiting. The rain kept falling, washing away any trace of hesitation. The moment was now, and Lucia knew it. The mountain did too. When the chair reached exactly the edge, Elizabeth's heart seemed to stop. She felt the emptiness ahead even before seeing it. Lucia gripped the handles from behind, her arms rigid. The wind returned with force, pushing them both. The storm hit everything except intention. Elizabeth tried to turn, but her body no longer responded. Time seemed suspended. It was the decisive instant. Something was about to happen. And no one seemed to be there to stop it. Lucia kept her hands firm on the chair as the rain ran down her face like tears that held no regret. She took a deep breath, like someone finally allowing herself to say something kept inside for far too long. Her voice came out low but heavy, mixing anger and relief. Donna Elizabeth sensed that those words were not improvised. Her daughter-in-law began to speak without meeting her eyes, as if the cliff were a silent accomplice. Each word fell heavier than the rain. There was no hurry now, there was pleasure in revealing the truth, and that made everything more cruel. Lucia spoke of the debts that grew in secret, like roots cracking concrete. Maxed-out credit cards, hidden loans, promises of luxury that were never sustained. She confessed that life beside a wealthy family had not brought security. It had brought comparison. It had brought humiliation. While Elizabeth lived surrounded by comfort, she pretended to belong. She smiled at expensive lunches while fear suffocated her from the inside. Every judging look was an invisible stab. Every piece of advice from her mother-in-law sounded like contempt. And that fed something dark. She said she waited 20 years. 20 years calculating time, watching her mother-in-law age like someone watching a broken clock. Every birthday Elizabeth celebrated was a frustration. Every illness overcome, a disappointment. Lucia did not speak with shame. She spoke with coldness, as if she were explaining an investment that took too long to pay off. Elizabeth listened, stunned, feeling the weight of emotional betrayal even before the physical one. The rain hid the trembling in the elderly woman's body. Lucia revealed that it was never love, nor respect. It had been calculation from the beginning. The inheritance had always been at the center of everything, the house, the land, the name, the power. She believed she deserved it more than anyone else, that she had paid the price by living with a controlling old woman. The words were sharp, chosen to wound. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten, not because of the threat, but because of the twisted truth she heard. Everything she had built had been reduced to a prize. Her daughter-in-law spoke of the exhaustion of pretending, of smiling while accumulating resentment, of feeling invisible within luxury. She said that night was merely the logical end of a wait that had gone on too long, that the storm was perfect, that no one would suspect a thing, that the world would easily accept the version of a cruel fate. Elizabeth tried to interrupt, but no voice came out. Her body felt heavier than the chair. Her mind, however, was clear enough to understand she had created a monster without realizing it. Lucia then leaned closer, like someone sharing an intimate secret. She said no one would miss the old woman for very long, that the mourning would be brief, elegant, respectful, that she would cry in front of everyone. The tears were already rehearsed. The confession sounded like a finished script. Every detail seemed planned. Elizabeth felt something break inside her. It was not fear. It was the pain of realizing she had been deceived for decades. The rain intensified, pounding hard against the metal of the chair. Lucia lifted her face, letting the water mix with a crooked smile. She said that night would put an end to everything. Debts, dependence, submission. It was time to resolve things. The word came out clean, without moral weight. As if pushing someone to their death were just a practical decision. Elizabeth tried to find humanity in that face. She found none, only haste. Her daughter-in-law explained that no one would believe there had been violence, that her mother-in-law's age helped, that the mountain would do the dirty work. The wheelchair would be the perfect excuse. Dementia, disorientation, accident. The words echoed like hammer blows. Elizabeth realized that this confession was not a mistake. It was a farewell. A final act of power, and that terrified her more than the abyss. Lucia took a deep breath again, like someone preparing for the final step. The wind blew harder, pushing the chair slightly. Elizabeth felt her body tilt forward. The cliff seemed closer. The confession was over. Everything had been said. Nothing else needed explaining. The rain kept falling, merciless. Lucia tightened her grip on the handles, and the silence that formed announced that the next move would be irreversible. Lucia took a step back, like someone pulling away only to gain momentum. The rain ran along the edge of the cliff, turning the ground into a slick trap. She watched the chair for a second longer than necessary, not out of pity but to memorize the scene. She wanted to remember that moment as the exact turning point. The wind blew hard, swaying Elizabeth's fragile body. The mountain seemed to push along with it. Lucia adjusted the position of her feet, took a deep breath, and decided. Her hands moved quickly, firmly, trained by conviction. The wheelchair brakes were released with a dry click, almost imperceptible amid the storm. Elizabeth felt her body move forward a few centimeters, and her heart raced. She tried to grip the sides of the chair, but her fingers had no strength. The world seemed to tilt before her eyes. The rain now struck her face directly, making it hard even to see. Lucia remained silent. There were no more words. The confession had already served its purpose. Now, only action remained. The chair began to slide slowly as if testing its own fate. The creaking of the wheels mixed with the distant sound of thunder. Elizabeth tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat. The incline increased second by second. Mud slipped beneath the tires, accelerating the movement. Lucia watched everything with cold attention. She knew that pace made it all more believable that a sudden fall would raise suspicion, that a gradual loss looked like an accident. And she wanted perfection. When the chair reached the edge, time seemed to slow. The emptiness opened ahead like a bottomless abyss. Elizabeth felt her stomach drop even before falling. The sky was too dark, the rain too intense. Nothing would be seen clearly afterward. Lucia kept her hands off the chair. That it was important that no one could say there had been a push. She needed the world to believe in the narrative of chance, destiny, fatality. Then came the final push. That it was not violent, that it was precise, that a quick touch, almost elegant, enough to break the balance. The chair tilted completely. Elizabeth felt her body being thrown forward. The scream finally came out, short, torn, swallowed by the wind. Metal scraped against stone. The world turned into a blur of rain, sky, and rock, and then came the fall. Lucia stepped back immediately. Her heart was pounding, but not with regret. That it was adrenaline. She heard the distant sound of the chair descending, striking, disappearing, then silence. A heavy, definitive silence. The mountain swallowed everything as if nothing had happened. Lucia closed her eyes for a moment. Let the rain wash her face. That scene needed to remain recorded only in her memory, and in no one else's imagination. She began to organize the role she would assume from then on. The desperate daughter-in-law, the woman who tried to stop it. The one who arrived too late. The tears that would come would be easy. She had rehearsed them in front of the mirror many times. She thought of the doctors, the police, the neighbors. Everyone would accept the explanation that a confused elderly woman, that a stormy night, that an unfortunate accident. Lucia looked at the cliff once more. There was no movement, no sound, no sign of life. That reassured her. The perfection of the plan depended on that silence. She turned, adjusted her posture, and began to descend the trail. Each step now felt lighter. The inheritance was no longer a distant dream. That it was close, almost within reach. As she walked, Lucia rehearsed the expression of shock, the rapid breathing, the restrained crying, the trembling voice. Everything needed to look real. She even stumbled on purpose, dirtying her clothes even more. The mud would help tell the story. The storm was her ally. The mountain her accomplice. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing indicated a crime. What Lucia did not know was that the mountain's silence did not mean solitude. Among the trees, among the soaked bushes, something had moved. Watchful eyes, hidden, had seen too much. As she walked away, convinced she was alone that night, fate began to sketch an invisible flaw in her perfect plan. A presence that should not have been there. A witness no one would imagine, and one that would change everything in the next instant. Lien was on the mountain because hunger does not wait for permission. The boy had climbed up before the storm, carrying in his thin body the urgency of someone who learns early how to survive. That he knew those paths better than many adults. That he knew where the ground sank, where the stone cut, where the wind deceived. As the rain fell, he crouched among the bushes, protecting a small empty bag. That he hoped to find something, roots, forgotten fruit, anything to silence his stomach. The storm did not scare him. Hunger was scarier, and that was why he stayed. When he heard the sound of the chair creaking, Lien stopped. The noise did not belong on the mountain that he instinctively crouched lower, his small body almost disappearing among the wet leaves. His attentive eyes followed the movement of the two figures on the trail that he did not know who they were. Nor did he need to. Something about that scene did not feel right, the woman's haste, the other's silence, the dangerous closeness to the abyss. Everything screamed without sound, and Lien saw it. The boy did not speak. That he never had. From a very young age he had learned that the world did not wait for his words. But his eyes understood more than many adults ever would. That he watched in silence, with the sharp attention of someone who depends on it to live. That he saw the woman release the brakes. That he saw the body in the chair tilt forward. That he saw the quick push, almost invisible, and he saw the fall. The short scream was lost in the rain, but not in him. That it stayed there, etched. Impossible to forget. Lien felt his body go cold, his heart pounded too hard, and he brought a hand to his mouth, stifling any sound, not out of fear of the woman, but because of the weight of what he had just witnessed. That he knew, even without words, that it had not been an accident. The mountain knew accidents. That was something else. Something wrong, deeply wrong. The rain seemed to hide the crime, but it could not erase what he had seen. And that left him frozen for a few seconds. When the woman walked away, Lien remained still. That he waited. That he counted time the way he knew how. Why his breathing. Why the thunder. Why the cold creeping up his legs. Only when the silence fully settled did he move. Curiosity overcame fear. Compassion overcame caution. That he crawled toward the edge with extreme care. The abyss opened before him like a dark mouth, and Lien looked down. The boy did not see a body lying below. That he did not see the end he expected to find. That he saw only shadows, branches, stone, and rain. The emptiness seemed greater than before. That confused him. That he frowned, trying to understand that if someone had fallen, there should have been some sign. A sound. A movement. But there was none. The mountain seemed to be keeping a secret. And Lien felt that he needed to look more closely. He began to climb down a little, gripping roots and stones. Every step was calculated. The risk was real, but the boy already lived with risks every day. The rain made everything more dangerous. Even so, he continued. Something pulled him downward, not his body, but his conscience. That he could not explain it. That he simply felt as if that night had chosen him to see, and once seeing, not be able to pretend that nothing had happened. That was when Lien heard it was not a scream. It was a weak moan, almost swallowed by the storm. A sound only someone attentive would notice. That he froze for a moment, his heart racing. That he looked around, trying to locate its source. The moan came from below. Far below. Lien felt a chill run up his spine. That meant only one thing: the woman had not died. The boy moved closer to the edge. With even greater care. Rain ran into his eyes, but he did not blink. Between the branches, between the darkness, he began to make out a shape. A trapped body, suspended, fighting against gravity. Lien swallowed hard. The invisible witness now carried something greater than a secret. That he carried a life hanging by a thread. And in that moment, even without saying a single word, he knew he could not simply walk away. The rain kept falling mercilessly as Lien strained his eyes to see better through the branches. The moan came again, weaker, almost giving up on existing. The boy felt his chest tighten, as if that sound were pulling something out of him. He crouched down, bracing his thin body against the slippery rock. The wind pushed, trying to drive him away from the edge, but Lien stayed. He leaned farther out, ignoring the fear that made his legs tremble. That was when he saw it, not a body at the bottom of the abyss, but something suspended between life and nothingness. Dona Elizabeth was caught on a thick branch jutting out from the mountain wall. The wheelchair had shattered when it struck the rocks, and only part of it had gotten hooked. The millionaire's body hung over the void, held up by sheer luck. Her right arm was trapped, injured, shaking with exhaustion. Her face was pale, covered in mud and blood mixed with the rain. Each breath seemed like an immense effort. She was no longer screaming. She had no strength left. Death had not taken her, but it was waiting. Just below. Lien felt his heart race. That was not a beautiful miracle. It was a cruel one. That those who survive by seconds know that he realized that any wrong movement could loosen the branch. Any slip would end everything. The mountain creaked, alive, unstable. The rain made the branch slick. Elizabeth could barely keep her eyes open. She did not know that someone was watching her. She believed she was alone at that end. The boy tried to get her attention, but no sound came out. He opened his mouth, forcing his throat. Nothing. His silence felt even heavier in that situation. Lien did what he knew how to do best. He observed. He analyzed. He searched for a solution with his eyes. He saw exposed roots, protruding stones, a possible path. It was dangerous. But there was no alternative. If he stayed there frozen, she would die. Elizabeth felt her arms slip a little. Her entire body swung over the void. A stronger moan escaped her lips, mixed with desperation. She closed her eyes for a moment, like someone accepting the end. She thought of the house, of her life, of her mistakes. She had never imagined dying like that, betrayed, alone, forgotten. She did not know that above her, a child was deciding to risk everything, not for money. Not out of obligation, but out of humanity. Lien began to climb down slowly. Every movement was calculated, almost choreographed by instinct. That he held onto roots, tested stones before putting his weight on them. Water poured down heavily, making traction difficult. Any slip meant falling together. Even so, he continued. Fear did not paralyze him. Fear made him careful. The boy descended with his body pressed against the rock, as if he were part of the mountain. When he got closer, Elizabeth opened her eyes. For a second she thought she was hallucinating. The sight was too absurd to be real. A child, soaked, covered in mud, descending toward her in the middle of the storm. She tried to speak, but her voice failed, her eyes filled with tears that the rain quickly washed away. Lien looked at her steadily, without fear, without judgment, just presence. He pointed to the branch, then upward, trying to communicate something. Elizabeth understood, not through words, but through his eyes. Hope appeared, faint but real. The boy assessed the condition of the branch, the weight of her body, the angle of the drop. It was little. It was risky. But it was still possible. Death was close, but it had not won. Not yet. And in that fragile moment, suspended between sky and abyss, their fate began to change direction. Lien looked around quickly, like someone calculating the impossible in seconds. That he knew he did not have the strength to pull an adult out of that abyss using only his arms. But he also knew that the mountain always offers alternatives to those who observe carefully. His eyes scanned the rocks, the roots, the broken branches scattered along the slope. The rain kept falling hard, making everything more difficult. Even so, the boy's mind worked fast. That he pulled from his pocket a piece of old rope he always carried. It was not long, nor strong, but it was what he had, and for Lien that was enough to try. He tied the rope to a thick root above them, testing it carefully. That he pulled with his own weight, feeling whether it would hold. The root creaked, but did not give way. Lien took a deep breath. Then with quick movements he climbed down a little more and wrapped the other end of the rope around Elizabeth's body. She tried to help, but her injured arm trembled too much. Each movement made the branch creak dangerously. The boy signaled for her to remain as still as possible. The silence between them was absolute, broken only by the rain. There was no room for error, nor for haste. Lien then positioned himself above her, bracing his feet against the rock. That he tied the rope to his own body, the way he had learned by watching adults on the mountain. It was not technique. It was survival. That he leaned back, using his own weight as a counterbalance. The pain hit immediately. His small body protested. But he did not stop. The branch began to loosen slowly. With each centimeter gained, Elizabeth felt her body rise a little. Her heart beat out of rhythm. Not from fear alone, but from disbelief. The rain made the rope slippery. Lien's hands burned, aching from the effort. His body trembled, but he kept his teeth clenched. Elizabeth closed her eyes, afraid that the boy would fall along with her. But Lien did not let go. He pulled with everything he had, and with what he did not have as well. Each breath was an effort. Each pull felt like the last. Even so, he continued. As if giving up were not an existing option. The rope snapped sharply, making both of them freeze for an eternal second. Elizabeth felt her body drop a few centimeters. Her heart nearly stopped. Lien quickly adjusted his feet, digging them more firmly into the rock. He pulled again, now screaming in silence. His muscles ached like never before. But the branch finally began to give way completely, releasing the woman's body. Now it was all or nothing. The mountain seemed to watch that uneven struggle. A child against the abyss. And surprisingly, the child was winning. With one final effort, Lien threw himself backward, using his entire body weight as an anchor. Elizabeth was pulled up all at once, scraping against the rock. She fell onto her side, gasping, feeling the ground beneath her body again. The world spun for a few seconds, the rain beat down hard, but she was alive. Lien collapsed into a seated position right after, exhausted, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Neither of them spoke. The silence now had another meaning. It was no longer the silence of death. It was the silence of the impossible that had just happened. Elizabeth tried to move, feeling pain all over her body, but she was whole, alive. She looked at the boy with difficulty, trying to understand what she was seeing. A thin boy, covered in mud, trembling from cold and effort. Nothing about him suggested luxury, nothing suggested power, and yet he had just saved her, the powerful woman, the millionaire, the owner of everything, saved by someone who had nothing. That thought struck hard, and began to change something inside her. Lien stood up slowly, almost staggering that he looked up the trail, then down, assessing the risks. They could not stay there. The storm continued. The mountain was still dangerous. He made a simple gesture with his hand, indicating that they needed to leave. Elizabeth nodded, even without knowing how that boy would manage it, but she trusted him. Because that night he had already done the impossible once. And something told her that this was only the beginning. The walk away from the slope was slow and painful. Elizabeth leaned her body against the rocks while Lien walked ahead, attentive to every step. The rain was beginning to ease, but the cold seemed more intense now. The woman's body ached all over, but her mind hurt even more. She could not stop looking at the boy. There was something about him that awakened an old. The one she had despised had given her the only chance to survive. Money had not appeared that night. Power had not come down the mountain, dignity had. Elizabeth felt her eyes fill with tears. This time, it was not fear that it was belated recognition. She remembered the day she sent Lucian away, his look, silent, respectful, wounded. She remembered how she offered no help, no justice, no empathy. Now there, dependent on his grandson, everything made sense in a painful way. She realized the mountain had passed judgment, not on wealth, but on character. And she was in debt. Lien watched her reaction without fully understanding. But he felt that something important was happening. The woman's expression had changed. There was no more arrogance, no distance. There was humility, something rare in people like her. Elizabeth tried to stand up on her own, failed, and Lien helped her without hesitation. The gesture was simple, natural, without expectation, that struck her even harder. She would never have received that help from the very world she had built, and that frightened her. The millionaire took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She could not go back home. She could not appear alive now. She knew that clearly. The woman who had tried to kill her still believed she was dead, and that put her in danger. Elizabeth looked at Lien and then at the path ahead. She needed to hide, she needed help. And ironically, the only possible help came precisely from those she had pushed away. The weight of that realization fell like another fall. Only this time internal. She gently touched the boy's shoulder, seeking his attention. She pointed to herself, then downward, then made a gesture for silence. Lien understood quickly that he nodded, that he did not seem surprised. Perhaps he already knew, even without words, how the adult world works. That those who hurt do not stop at the first blow. They needed to disappear. The mountain still offered refuges. And Lien knew them all. That he motioned for her to follow him. And in that simple gesture, a silent pact was born. As they walked away from the cliff, Elizabeth felt something new growing inside her. That it was not just gratitude, that it was the awareness that her life had been spared for something greater. Something she could not yet name, but she knew it involved reparation, justice, and change. The past had knocked on the door that night, and she could no longer pretend she did not see it. The mountain had chosen its sides. And Elizabeth was beginning to understand that. Lien led Elizabeth along trails that appeared on no map, narrow paths hidden by vegetation and by the neglect of those who never needed them. The rain was easing, but the cold remained clinging to the skin. Each step the woman took was an effort, and the boy adjusted the pace without needing to be told. That he knew when to stop, that he knew when to go on. The mountain was his invisible home. After some time they reached a lower area, sheltered from the wind there, among darkened stones and remnants of old charcoal. There was an improvised shelter. Simple, but safe. It was an old charcoal kiln pit, abandoned years earlier. The dark earth walls still held warmth when the wind struck outside. Elizabeth looked around, trying to understand where she was. Nothing there suggested luxury, nothing suggested comfort. But there was something her mansion had not had that night: protection. Lien motioned for her to sit on a pile of old cloths. Then he lit a small fire with silent skill. The heat began to restore sensation to the woman's body, and she felt the shock of reality. She was alive, hidden, and dependent. Soon after, a figure appeared at the entrance of the shelter. It was Lucian, the charcoal burner. Lien's grandfather. The man life had hardened but not corrupted. That he carried on his shoulders the weight of years of labor and rejection. When he saw Elizabeth there, dirty, injured, unrecognizable, his eyes narrowed. There was no hatred, there was caution. Lien stepped closer to him and explained in the only way he knew. With gestures, with urgency, with truth in his eyes. Lucian understood more than he needed. The silence that followed was tense. Elizabeth felt the judgment she deserved. She lowered her head, unable to hold that man's gaze. Lucian could have refused her. That he could have sent her away. The world would have found it just. But he did not. That he simply took a deep breath and indicated that she should stay, without words, without demands. That simple gesture wounded Elizabeth more than any accusation. Because it was pure dignity, and she knew she had never offered that to him. The days that followed began there in the darkness of the shelter. Lucian tended to the woman's injuries with what little he had: clean water, simple herbs, patience. Leon always remained nearby, attentive, silent. Elizabeth watched everything with new eyes. The poverty there was not neglect, that it was organization, respect, care. Every gesture was done without haste, without hidden interest. She realized she had never been cared for like that. Not with all the money in the world. News of the tragedy began to spread outside. Elizabeth did not hear it, but she felt it. The world went on believing in her death, and that frightened and protected her at the same time. Lucian made it clear with firm gestures that no one could know. The mountain had eyes and ears. They needed to disappear for a while. There in the charcoal shelter, a silent agreement was born. She would remain hidden, they would take care of her. And in return, when the right time came, the truth would come to light. Elizabeth began to reflect on everything she had lived through, every decision, every act of contempt, every order given without looking at the one who received it. Now she depended on exactly those people, and there was no humiliation in that, there was learning. She realized that luxury had blinded her humanity, and that the mountain that night had torn that blindfold away by force. Lucian never treated her as an employer, nor as an enemy, that he treated her as someone who needed help, and that dismantled her from within. Lien, even without speaking, communicated all the time, that he warned when someone approached, that he indicated dangers, that he brought food when he could. Elizabeth began to watch the boy with silent admiration, that he had a sharp, practical intelligence, shaped by survival. She thought about everything he had never had access to, and about everything she could have done differently. That thought began to turn into something heavier. Responsibility. Not charity, real responsibility. At night, while the wind battered hard outside, Elizabeth stared at the earthen ceiling of the shelter. The pain in her body was bearable. The pain in her conscience was not. She knew Lucia believed she had won. She knew the inheritance was being celebrated in silence. But there, in the dark, something new was forming, that it was not immediate revenge, that it was strategy, that it was justice being patiently conceived. And for the first time in many years, Elizabeth felt she was on the right side of history. The news spread early, even before the sun could break through the clouds. The village radio crackled between one old song and another when the announcer's voice grew more serious, that he spoke of tragedy, of a stormy night, of a wealthy woman who had supposedly been lost to her own carelessness. Dona Elizabeth was officially dead. The version was simple, clean, easy to swallow, that a confused elderly woman. A wheelchair. An unfortunate accident on the mountain. Nothing more than that. Inside the dark shelter, Elizabeth heard every word as if it were a slow blow. There was no doubt, Lucia had acted fast. Much faster than she had imagined. The radio described the incident with rehearsed details: the trail, the rain, the desperation of the daughter-in-law who had tried to help. Elizabeth closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the lie settling in. The world believed it, and believing was comfortable. No one likes to doubt a grieving widow, especially one who cries convincingly. Lucia appeared on the radio shortly afterward. Her voice sounded choked, carefully fragile. She spoke between calculated pauses, like someone struggling to go on. She said Elizabeth had always been strong, that she loved her family, that night had been a terrible mistake. Each sentence came with a sigh, with measured emotion. Elizabeth recognized the tone, that it was the same one used in important meetings, when Lucia needed to persuade. Now she was persuading an entire town, and it was working. Lucian turned off the radio firmly. The silence that followed was heavy. Lien looked back and forth between the device and Elizabeth, trying to understand. Even without grasping every word, he felt the gravity of it. The rich woman was now a name on the air. A collective mourning was beginning to be staged, and the one who had caused everything was being treated as the victim. Elizabeth clenched her hands, feeling something new arise. It was not fear. It was indignation. A calm, dangerous, lucid indignation. The radio also announced that preparations for the funeral were already underway, that close relatives would take care of everything, that the inheritance would follow legal procedures. Lucia's name was mentioned as directly responsible. She was the devoted daughter-in-law, the only present heir, the strong woman who would survive the loss. Each word seemed to seal an invisible contract. Elizabeth realized that if nothing were done, Lucia would not only go unpunished, but would be rewarded, and that was unbearable. Inside the shelter, the tension grew with every passing minute. Lucian knew the search would begin. Bodies are searched for. Even when everyone believes in the death, security guards, armed men, the curious. The mountain would not remain at peace for long. They needed to prepare.to hide better.to think ahead. Elizabeth breathed deeply, trying to keep her clarity. She could not appear now. But she also could not accept that outcome. The lie was too solid to be broken without proof. That was when something crossed her mind like a lightning bolt. A small memory, almost forgotten. A technical detail. Something Lucia had probably ignored. Elizabeth brought a hand to her arm as if feeling the absence of something. Her heart raced. If that still existed, if it had not been destroyed in the fall, perhaps the truth was still alive somewhere on the mountain. The radio kept talking outside, but inside, a new plan was beginning to take shape. Silent, dangerous, and capable of turning everything upside down. The memory returned with enough force to knock the air out of Elizabeth. It was not a grand memory, but a technical detail, almost invisible. She had always been afraid of depending on other people. That was why she had ordered her wheelchair adapted with discrete features. Among them, a small recorder embedded in the armrest. A simple device, activated by pressure. Designed to record falls, emergencies, any suspicious situation. Very few people knew of its existence. Lucia was not one of them, and that reignited something Elizabeth thought she had lost: hope. She brought a hand to her injured arm, feeling the absence of the chair. The fall had separated everything: metal, body, destiny. But the recorder was durable, resistant to light impact. Waterproof for several hours. Elizabeth knew the specifications because she had demanded them. If the chair had gotten caught somewhere on the slope, the device might still be there. And if it was, it would have recorded everything. The confession, the threats, every poisonous word from Lucia, the raw truth without disguise. Lucian listened carefully as Elizabeth explained as best she could. She drew in the air, pointed, indicated the fall, the arm of the chair. The radio playing helped reinforce the urgency. Lucian understood quickly, not the technical details but the essential. There was evidence. Evidence that could change everything. Lien watched the two of them, attentive, absorbing the tension. He did not need to understand complicated words. He understood danger and opportunity. The mountain, however, does not forgive those who return unprepared. The rain had washed away part of the trail. The ground was still unstable. Lucian knew this better than anyone. Searching for the chair would be risky. But not searching meant accepting the lie. Elizabeth felt the weight of the decision. Her life now depended not only on surviving, but on proving that she had survived. Without that recording, she would remain dead to the world, and Lucia would remain free. That could not happen. Lien took a few steps forward and pointed toward the mountain. Then he made a descending gesture, tying an imaginary rope around his body. Lucian immediately frowned. No, it was far too dangerous. But the boy insisted, firm. He knew every uneven stretch of that place. He had gone down and up in worse conditions. The difference now was the human risk involved. It was not just survival. It was justice. And Lien seemed to understand that instinctively. Elizabeth watched the silent exchange between grandfather and grandson. She felt a knot form in her throat, the idea of putting that child in danger because of her hurt deeply. But she also knew that Lien had been in danger since the moment he saw everything. The truth had chosen him. And choosing not to act would be another kind of sentence. She grasped Lucian's arm with difficulty. Her look said everything. It was not an order. It was a plea. Lucian let out a deep breath. The mountain had already demanded too much from that family, but perhaps it was time to demand something back. The plan began to take shape with brutal simplicity. No exaggerated heroism. No margin for error. They would wait for dawn. The water would recede a little, visibility would help. Lien would descend tied with a thick rope, using his light body to his advantage. He would search for the remains of the chair, especially the armrest. If he found the recorder, he would return immediately. No curiosity. No detours. The mountain does not tolerate greed. Night fell heavily over the shelter. Elizabeth barely managed to sleep. Her body hurt, her mind hurt even more. He felt he had to move forward. The mountain had taken almost everything from him. But that night, it had given him a mission, and he did not intend to fail. When the first hint of light appeared on the horizon, Elizabeth opened her eyes. The day was beginning, and with it, the most dangerous part of everything. The lie was already circulating. The funeral was being prepared. Time was working against them. If the recording was not recovered soon, the story would close without challenge. Lien stood up in silence, looked at the mountain and then at Elizabeth. His gaze said it all. It was now, and nothing would be the same after that. The noise came before the voices. Heavy footsteps snapping branches, the metallic sound of weapons being adjusted, dogs pulling impatiently at their leashes. The mountain was waking up to a new phase of that story. Lucia was not satisfied with the official version alone. She wanted certainty. Absolute certainty that there were no survivors. That was why she sent Roberto, the head of security, that an experienced, cold man, used to solving problems without asking questions. And behind him came others. Armed men, trained dogs. The hunt had begun. In the shelter, Lucian sensed the danger before he could clearly hear it. The mountain had taught him that over the years that he raised his hand, signaling absolute silence. Lien understood instantly. The boy crouched, his body tense like a bow about to release. Elizabeth felt her blood turn cold. She did not need to hear names. She knew exactly who was coming. The lie now demanded armed protection. That confirmed everything. Lucia did not just want to inherit. She wanted to erase any risk, including people. The dogs began barking closer. The sound echoed through the trees, breaking the morning silence. Lucian quickly extinguished the fire, scattering dirt over it with his foot. The smell of smoke had to disappear. Elizabeth held her breath, trying to suppress a cough. Every sound seemed too loud, every movement too dangerous. Roberto advanced with professional calm, that he knew that kind of terrain, that he knew how to read tracks, that he knew when something was wrong. And something was wrong on that mountain. The men spread out in formation, point 2 along the main trail. Others circling from above. The dogs pulled hard, sniffing the wet ground. The rain had erased a lot, but not everything. Lucian knew that. So he signaled quickly toward an alternative exit. They needed to buy time. Not fight. Not confront. Their strength was not in weapons, that it was in disappearing. Elizabeth understood. She could not run, but she could trust. Roberto stopped suddenly, that he knelt and touched the ground with his fingers. The lead dog grew restless. The trail was there, faint, interrupted, but real, that he raised his hand, calling the others' attention. The hunt became more serious, that it was no longer protocol, that it was confirmation. Someone had been there after the fall, and that changed everything. Roberto pressed the radio on his shoulder, that he spoke low and firm. The order was clear: find them and silence them. In the shelter, Elizabeth felt the weight of past mistakes. All of this was happening because she had trusted too much, because she had ignored signs, because she had dismissed people like Lucian. Now they were paying together. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in despair, but in focus, that if they got out of there alive, nothing would ever be the same. That hunt was not just for a body, that it was for a truth that insisted on breathing. And that made everything more dangerous. Lien watched the movements outside with absolute attention, that he knew the shortcuts the men could not see, that he knew where scent got confused, where the ground deceived. The boy touched his grandfather's arm and pointed in a direction opposite the shelter. Then he mimicked an animal running. Lucian understood immediately. The idea was risky, but possible. They needed to distract the dogs, create a false trail, divert death by a few meters. Sometimes that is all life asks. The barking grew closer. Elizabeth felt her heart pounding in her ears. Time was shrinking. Roberto was already close enough to hear any mistake. Lien moved a few steps away, silent as a shadow, that he looked one last time at Elizabeth. There was no fear in his eyes, there was determination. The invisible witness was now becoming a target, and without saying a word, the boy launched himself into the most dangerous part of the mountain, ready to save one more life. Lien ran deeper into the mountain with the care of someone who knows exactly where to step. It was not a desperate run, it was calculated. The boy slipped between trees, stepping on already soaked leaves so as not to leave obvious tracks. The dog's barking came right behind him, growing closer by the second, that he could feel the ground vibrate with the men's advance. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed clear. Lien was not running to escape, he was running to lead them. He knew exactly where he wanted to take them, and danger was part of the plan. Farther ahead, the vegetation grew dense and the terrain uneven. There, the mountain sheltered one of its most feared inhabitants, the wild boar. Lien had seen it before, he knew where it usually hid, where it dug the earth, where it left strong scent marks. He approached carefully, grabbed a thick branch and began striking the trees, breaking leaves and kicking up dirt. He made enough noise to wake anything nearby. And it worked. A deep grunt echoed through the forest, heavy, threatening. The ground itself seemed to move. The wild boar burst out suddenly, huge, aggressive, startled. Lien did not wait to see more. He ran in the opposite direction, dodging at the last second. The animal charged in fury, snapping branches and tearing up roots. The noise was deafening. When the dogs reached the spot, they found a confused, mixed, overwhelming trail: animal scent, churned earth, chaos. The barking changed tone. It was no longer pursuit. It was alarm. Roberto arrived moments later, weapon in hand. He saw the destroyed vegetation, heard the distant sound of the boar fleeing. The dogs pulled hard on their leashes, uncertain. Human scent vanished amid animal smell that he cursed under his breath. The mountain had turned the game around that he ordered the men to pull back a few meters that no one wanted to face a wounded, enraged boar, especially in dense terrain. The hunt would have to be reconsidered, and that time was everything Lien needed to give the others. Meanwhile, Lien hid behind a large rock, gasping. His body trembled, not from fear, but from exertion. That he waited, that he heard the footsteps retreat, that he heard the men's confused voices. When he was sure the immediate danger had passed, he moved back silently along the reverse path that he slipped through secondary trails, invisible to anyone who had not grown up there. Each step was a silent victory. That he did not smile, that he did not celebrate. Not yet. She did not want to spend emotion before the time came. Lucian gripped his grandson's shoulder tightly. That he said nothing, that he did not need to. The boy had just faced armed men using only intelligence and courage, and he had won. Lien pointed toward the mountain, then toward the sky, indicating that time had been bought. But not much. Roberto and his men would return. They always do. Elizabeth understood the message. They could not wait any longer. The descent to retrieve the chair had to happen immediately. The recording was now or never. The wild boar distraction had created a short, dangerous, precious window. And that child, invisible to the world, had saved them all once again without saying a single word. The time Lien had bought seemed to slip away like water through his fingers. The mountain would not forgive a second delay. Lucian tied the thick rope around an ancient tree, testing every knot with experienced hands. Elizabeth watched in silence, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. It was not just a physical descent. It was a return to the point where everything had been broken. Lien approached the edge without hesitation. His face was serious, focused. No trace of childish bravado. Only concentration. The mountain demanded that. The rope was secured around his body with care. Lucian adjusted it once more, pulling hard to make sure. Elizabeth wanted to say something, to ask him to be careful, to thank him. But no words came. Any sound felt useless in the face of the risk. Lien looked up one last time. Then he began to descend. His small body slowly disappeared into the damp mist. The rock was slippery. Rain from the previous night still ran in constant streams. Each meter conquered felt like a challenge to gravity, and to death. Below, the slope looked even more hostile. Loose stones, broken branches, twisted pieces of metal scattered around. The wheelchair had not withstood the fall. It was destroyed, shattered into mangled fragments. Lien felt his stomach tighten. For a moment, he thought everything had been in vain. But then he remembered the detail. The armrest. That he began to search carefully, ignoring the cold that cut into his skin. The sound of water grew louder. Something more dangerous was announcing itself. The mountain was not finished with them yet. The sky above began to change color. Dark clouds gathered quickly. Lucian noticed first that he shouted something that the wind carried away. Elizabeth felt her heart race. A flash flood. She knew the phenomenon from old accounts. Heavy rain elsewhere in the range could turn a trickle into a silent avalanche. Lien heard the sound before he saw it. A distant, growing roar. That he hurried his movements. His hands trembled. Not from fear but from urgency. Time was up. Finally, among mud and stones he found it. The armrest was there, almost intact, wedged between two rocks. Lien pulled hard. The metal gave way. He opened the improvised compartment with nimble fingers. The small recorder was there, wet, covered in mud, but intact. The boy held the object as if it were sacred. At that moment, the sound of water became deafening. The current rushed violently downward, sweeping everything in its path. The mountain showed its cruelest face. Lien shouted silently, yanking the rope hard to signal. Lucian felt the jolt and began hauling him up immediately. The water advanced far too fast. Stones shifted beneath the boy's feet. One came loose, striking his leg. The pain was sharp, but it did not make him let go of the recorder. Elizabeth was screaming above without realizing it. Her body trembled. The rope groaned under the weight and the urgency. Every second felt final. The water had already reached Lien's feet. Hell was rising to claim him. With one last effort, Lucian pulled with everything he had. Lien's body was flung up onto the edge, soaked, injured, but alive. The water surged just below, swallowing the remains of the chair, erasing every trace. The boy collapsed onto his side, gasping, still holding the recorder. Elizabeth crawled to him, ignoring her own pain. Her hands trembled as they touched the object. That was the truth. Or what remained of it. But the device's condition was uncertain. The water had been far too violent. The mountain had demanded a heavy price. And no one there knew whether that evidence was still breathing, or if everything had been lost in that abyss. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of the water rushing down the embankment. Lien remained lying there, breathing with difficulty, his body marked by pain. Lucian helped him sit up, quickly examining the injured leg. Elizabeth, sometimes, surviving is knowing how to wait for the right moment. Night fell once again over the mountain. Elizabeth worsened, her fever rising. Lucian thought about how to get them out of there before dawn. Lien remained attentive to the small object near the fire. The silence felt final. But somewhere inside that soaked recorder, perhaps the truth was still resisting. No one there knew. What they did know was that the funeral would take place at dawn, and if that evidence did not speak by then, Lucia would win forever. The church dawned far too full for such a hurried morning. Expensive flowers filled every corner, exuding a perfume that tried to mask the haste. The closed casket rested at the front, heavy with symbolism and empty inside. Lucia sat in the front row, dressed in impeccable black, posture firm, face downcast in just the right measure. Every tear seemed carefully calculated to be seen. The village murmured words of sympathy. No one suspected anything. The story had already been accepted. Elizabeth was dead to everyone, and that made the ceremony a perfect performance. At the back of the church, almost invisible, 3 figures entered in silence. Lucian supported Elizabeth, covered by a simple coat and a scarf over her face. Her body was still weak, but her eyes were now lucid. Lien walked ahead, alert, carrying something small against his chest, the recorder. During the night, the unlikely had happened. The device, after hours of drying, had given a single sign of life. A brief flicker. Enough, the audio was there, fragile, but intact, and this would be the only chance. The priest began to speak about destiny, about divine will, about unexpected losses. Lucia lowered her head, pretending deep sorrow. That was when Lien moved. He discreetly reached the church's sound system, something simple, old. Lucian helped, with steady hands. Elizabeth remained hidden, her heart racing. Time seemed to stretch. A cable was connected. A button pressed. For one eternal second, nothing happened. The murmuring in the church grew. Lucia began to lift her gaze, suspicious, and then, the voice echoed. It was her voice, raw, cold, without tears. I waited 20 years for this. The sound reverberated through the church walls like a moral thunderclap. People turned, confused. The priest stopped speaking. The recording continued. Debts, ambition, the plan, the stormy night, the push. Every word came out clear, undeniable. Silence took over the place. Lucia went pale. She tried to stand, but her legs failed. The performance was over. Before anyone could react, Elizabeth stepped forward a few paces. She removed the scarf from her face. A collective gasp swept through the church. It was her, alive, injured. But there, the corpse, was breathing. The lie collapsed before everyone's eyes. Lucia fell to her knees, not in remorse but in despair. The police, already called by someone in the congregation, were approaching. Elizabeth looked at Lien. The boy no one saw was now at the center of everything. The truth had been saved by the most unlikely hands. As Lucia was restrained, Elizabeth felt something she had never felt before. It was not victory. It was liberation. She walked over to Lucian and Lien, placing her hand on their shoulders. There, before everyone, she recognized who truly had value. Wealth had failed, power had failed, but dignity had not. The church, which was meant to bury a dead woman, witnessed a rebirth. And the silence that filled the space was not just shock. It was awareness. In the end, the mountain did not choose the strongest. It did not choose the richest. It did not choose those with power, money, or a voice. It chose those with character. A woman who believed she controlled everything almost won through lies. But she was defeated by something she could never buy. Conscience. A boy who did not speak saved a life, exposed a crime, and taught a lesson no one there would ever forget. And a millionaire who despised the poor had to lose everything to finally see who truly mattered. How many truths are buried every day because no one listens to those without power? How many injustices go unnoticed because we believe appearances more than facts? And if that child had not been there, do you think anyone would ever have known the truth? If this story made you reflect, leave a comment. Do you believe money always wins? Or that truth always finds a way? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following stories that show that sometimes the greatest miracle is not surviving, it is achieving justice when no one believes in you.